There we go.
Thanks. So this is the meeting, this is a meeting where we're talking about how we're doing on the Epic to decouple Puma from the Pages NFS mount. And thanks for doing all the organizational stuff on setting this up, Bob. I made a little agenda, and I suppose we can get started with the agenda. Or is there any? Are there any questions before we start with the agenda? No.
Not yet.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not used to running meetings like this or being recorded. It feels a little weird, but I felt like I had to say something. Yeah, so
I mean,
the first thing,
we can keep it fairly informal, I think.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree. But the reason I want this to be recorded is that so this meeting originated within the Scalability team, and the Scalability team is helping the release team, and the release team owns all this stuff.
And there's nobody here from the release team.
Exactly. So at the very least, I want people from the release team to be able to look at this. Yeah. Anyway, but I thought that because there's a sort of narrowly defined thing that the Scalability team is working on right now, it made sense to just talk within the Scalability team, and hi Igor, about this narrow thing, and that is the thing where we look at the code in the Rails code base that touches the Pages NFS drive, and we try to move it all into Sidekick. So
some background on that, that's because we want to move the Puma workers into Kubernetes, and that can't touch NFS, but we still have more stuff touching NFS in Sidekick, and we will have like a single bunch of VMs touching NFS. That's the goal.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We're trying to shrink the number of VMs that need NFS, and yeah, there's a separate piece of large project going on in Pages to make sure that Pages can work without NFS at all. But that is much that's much bigger in scope.
Well, you did a proof of concept for that, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I'm not the only one who did a proof of concept for that. So they still the people working on this still need to decide like which way to go. Yeah. And then there needs to be a bunch of work done in Pages to make that work, a bunch of work in Rails, and all the time we need to think about what would the migration look like. But even before we even migrate, we need to get it in production for some sites and see if that works. So that is that's a big project, much bigger in scope than what we're talking about today. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk today is that this thing got handed at first just to me, and I tried to make sense of it, and I thought, okay, well, let's just set up an Epic and organize the work. And then Bob kindly started helping me, and now Bob has probably done as much work on this as I have. And I just wanted to reflect for a moment. I want to hear from. My question for you, Bob, is if you look at this Epic and you look at what we're doing, do you think this is going to work?
So if the Epic is complete, then I think so. I like the only one that is a little bit of a worry to me is the issue titled "Find all code that uses settings pages path," because I don't know what that might be right now. And I just saw that, so we have the Pages update worker, and now we have the new Pages update configuration worker that write to the NFS when pages are updated from a project, like when a domain is added, or when domains change, or when something else in the configs changes. Are we keeping tabs on what is touching NFS somehow? Like
okay,
that
so
sentry?
not yet. So I think what happened is that Vladimir, who knows this code well, made a list of things and said, well, this is definitely stuff we'll have to change. And then I looked at that and I did some grep on the code base, and I thought, yeah, okay, that looks like stuff we have to change. So we made some issues for that, and we stuffed those in the Epic. but we don't know if that is everything, and it's better to have some sort of way to check that we're not using NFS before we just unmount the volume. So yeah, we don't know what's going to come out of that. Well, in a way we do know, because we have the thing in Sentry now, so we can just look. One thing we can do, and that I haven't done yet, but that one of us can do, is look at that Sentry thing and go through all of them and see where it's coming from, and see if it's already covered by an existing issue in the epic, and if not, create an issue.
Yeah. Well, up to now, like quickly scrolling through, I found one, so there's going to be some, but I think the ones that touch the configuration are already going to clear up a lot, because the biggest.
Yeah, that's the thing. The other approach we can take is to say we postpone this a little bit and we try to get a couple more things in, because then a lot of these should disappear. But I guess it depends on if we can keep ourselves busy enough. Like if we're busy enough working on known issues, then we can just do the known issues and see the list of Sentry things dry up. And if we're running out of known issues, we can look at the Sentry issues and say, hey, there's a new one.
Yeah.
And if you already see a new one right now, Bob, then I think it makes a lot of sense to just create an issue for that.
Yeah.
That you create an issue for that now that you found it already.
I'll do that after this call, but yeah, there's going to be some.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Another thing may be worth considering. I mean, maybe the Sentry stuff already covers everything, but just as an extra sanity check, we could also use some tracing on like the syscall level or file system level to check that none of those write calls are happening anymore.
So yeah, we could. I think I have a fairly high degree of confidence in, well, okay, it's a good question. When I think about it, I think that unless the code does something insane, the thing we build should catch everything. But of course, that has the start of the sentence, unless the code does something insane, which I cannot 100% rule out.
That sounds fair to me.
Yeah. So I think there's, well, I think there's, yeah. So what could the insane thing be? One thing I think we know for sure is that the directory where pages get stored is configurable. And if anything does not obey that configuration, it would have broken for somebody somewhere who uses a funny directory. Of course, it could be that nobody uses a funny directory and we would have never heard about it. But I think Omnibus probably uses a funny directory. We can check this, but I actually remember this from a long time ago, from 7 years ago, that GitLab was full of things which were configurable, but we were so scared, we didn't know if they worked, if all the configurable directories worked. So we actually had this big banner in the installation guide where we said, put GitLab in home GitLab. And if not, then it may not work and it's your fault, because things might look like they're configurable, but maybe they use home GitLab. So just don't even change the user, change nothing. That was sort of the state of things 7 years ago. And then when we did Omnibus, we had to sort of say, no, we're going to put everything, a whole lot of things in different places, and that has to work. So we got better at that over time. So I'm assuming that nothing does something silly like, well, let's say the current working directory is the GitLab directory, and then we go to /shared/pages, and that must be the pages directory. I think anything that does that would be completely and utterly broken. Another way we could have something insane is because of the shared directory. I don't know if the shared directory is accessible through config, but something might assume that there is a shared directory and that pages is then located relative to the shared directory. And then, so some code could derive the path to the pages directory via some other, but this sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. So I'm not really
seems
sure.
Unlikely.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not really sure. Like what you're saying makes sense. Like we can do a tracing check like that.
Should we do
I
that
think,
at the end though? Like,
yeah,
let's get rid
that's
of the
my gut
exceptions
feeling.
because that's easy. And then before we unmount, we check like, is
I
something
think
still writing here?
I think that could be a part of the change, what is called change management issue, or the like once we like the real thing where the NFS drive goes away, that will be a task for SREs, and then from what I understand, we'll have or the SREs working on this will create a detailed process with sanity checks, and right, and so then one of the sanity checks would be trace the thing and look for this or something like that. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say we can defer that until then, and because we think it's highly likely that it will find nothing because of the current approach. Yeah. Good. Wow, I did a lot of talking. Thanks for typing, Bob. I'm not good at switching between talking and typing.
Me neither. That's why I'm typing now and sharing up.
Okay, so that's good. So we, yeah, we're pushing back a little bit on going through the Sentry list, but we'll probably have to. I threw feature flags on the agenda because I noticed that Bob made a change using feature flags, and I wanted to talk about how we feel about the risks we're taking, because I have to admit that my first thought was just I'm going to make a change that looks good and not use feature flags, but maybe that is because of my bad history of cowboy coding in the early days of GitLab, and I shouldn't do that. What do you think, Bob?
I figured that if I add feature flags and try this out, it'll be easier to roll out because we can do it more confidently. That's why now I'm also getting rid of the like the write when we don't need to write when changing configuration, because that's going would throw a lot of errors, and if SREs like, because you started tracking those errors, which is a good thing. If we now move that into Sidekick and flip the switch, then we might get alerts like, hey, lots of errors here, and then we need to figure out why that was. And now we know, like, let's get rid of it so nobody else needs to look into it at the time, because not everybody will know what we're doing.
What would happen with those Sidekick jobs?
They would get, well, so I wanted to have the benefit of Sidekick jobs that they are retried if something goes wrong. This access is slow. I don't know what. Like, I just count on the retry and then we get it done. But
because so the way the code used to work, just for context,
was swallow the error and don't do
either for the
anything.
sake, I don't know if Igor knows this context, and I don't know if the viewers know this context. There's a service class in Rails that is responsible for keeping the config.json file of each page's site up to date. And if this file changed, it also writes a new nonce to, or like a token to some other file that Pages then picks up, depending on how Pages is configured, because Pages can also be configured to not use the config.json files, but we have to support them. So there's a thing that does the config.json files, and when I started working on this, I realized that that thing swallows all errors. And like if there's an error, it gets rescued, and then the error string gets returned as a return value from the function, and nobody looks at the return value of the function. So it just errors all, it's rescue nil, basically. The whole thing has a big rescue nil. So we ran into that, and then actually Vladimir said, you know, because I was just rewriting the thing and saying, well, this is rescue nil, so let's make it look like rescue nil and not like it does something with the error, because it doesn't. And then Vladimir said, well, maybe we should track these things. And I thought, hey, that's a good idea. And then we got a torrent of errors because it turns out that I think every time you update the settings of a project, it will, you submit a form, and that form contains a value for the page's access level. And then in the project update service, we decide, oh, something changed about config.json, let's rewrite it. And then if the project has no pages associated, then the file system says, well, I don't know where to put this config.json, no end, and then you get an error. So we have massive, we call this code way more often than we thought, and it's erroring out all the time. So that's the context. And I think what you're telling me now, Bob, is that when you put this thing that errors out all the time in Sidekick, you decided to re-raise the error?
Not just that, like if we didn't do anything with the error, like you mentioned, then we would be scheduling Sidekick jobs a lot more than we thought we would, and they would do nothing. Like they would report the error.
They would get an eno end and just be done.
So, but because like I was reading that, I said, yeah, okay, so lots of things can go wrong with disk access. So let's do the proper retry thing and have Sidekick retry 3 times if it can't write the file or whatever. Let's raise that exception. But that would mean that if we schedule this job that isn't supposed to do anything, that instead of scheduling one Sidekick job and then failing, it would schedule the job 3 times, retrying.
Yeah, I hear where you're going. So I'm going to be devil's advocate for a moment. Should we really be retrying those jobs?
I think so, because otherwise the configuration would get out like.
But like the whole thing looks weird, right? Like it's erroring out left and right, but it was working. And now we're saying, well, we want to retry if we have these errors, but we weren't retrying before.
Well, it's also the job gets run much more often than we thought it would. So every click, like if the pages thing gets out of sync.
Yeah, but I'm saying we can. The naive thing to do would just be to say, well, this thing does rescue nil, or it swallows errors. That is a different problem. And we have a Sidekick job that tries once, and if it didn't work out, then it didn't work out. And that's as bad or as good as it was before we put it in Sidekick.
But we'd still schedule one job every time someone clicks update on the project, which is the main thing.
That part I'm not arguing with, but I'm wondering if making something that's taking code that was ignoring the exceptions and saying, let's stop ignoring the exceptions and let's do retries. If that is, I mean, I agree that it seems right, but is it strictly necessary for us to be doing that right now? And if that choice has consequences that create more work, should we maybe go back and not do that? Well, the retries. I'm talking about the retries and not, because the thing that you say, let's not try to write config.json for things that don't have pages. That just makes, that's just, like you say, that's like the idea of just leaving the place better than you found it. That seems reasonable.
I don't think, like if we've left the place better than we found it, I don't think it's extra work to do the retries, because we would not be scheduling the jobs that should fail. We can still report the exception and do nothing with it.
Yeah, okay.
Right now we're returning it to the job and to the worker, and the worker is raising it, if I remember correctly, because that's been yesterday since I've done that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that having retries does have infrastructure level implications, because there's potentially more load on NFS.
But the retries have backup, like the thing that that would have more infrastructure level consequences is the scheduling the jobs that are going to fail anyway, whether we retry them or not. That's the main thing to avoid, and I think But
I guess if we're currently making those futile calls at a certain rate, if we enable retries, in aggregate, the rate will now be 3 or 4 times the level, which might be fine, but
yes.
I don't know what we should values we should put on my guess, but my guess is this is not a big. Not the biggest issue, because
we would have noticed before from the Puma.
Well, no, I'm thinking about the NFS perspective. So it tries to read one file, because the first thing it does, it reads the current config.json, and then it compares that to the expected config JSON. And if those are the same, the thing returns. So at that first step where it reads the existing config JSON, that's where it errors out, because it tries to read a file that does not exist. So the pressure we're putting on the NFS server there is a bunch of attribute lookups, or it's not great, right? Because we're trying to open a file that doesn't exist, but it's one file. And out of all the things we can be doing to the NFS server, I think this is not the most dramatic.
No, the bigger impact is the extra job schedule, I think.
Yeah, and the thing is that I do agree with Bob. Like, so on the one hand, we're now tripling, right? We are putting there was a certain load on the system, and we get a lot of it fails, and now we're getting retries, so we're tripling that. But then, how many % of projects have pages associated with them? Because it might be like 5% or something. We should get that number. But so on the one hand, we're tripling something, but on the other hand, we're taking 95% of it away. So at the end,
so we're also fixing the issue where we're making
that's
okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Bob is doing that.
Yeah. Then everything is fine. Yeah.
The goal is to retry actual problems, not broken things.
Then I think it sounds perfectly fine to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like feature flags, yes, please.
Yeah. No. Okay. That's fair enough. I'm still working. I'm still trying to do one of these things myself, and I'm still struggling with it. One of these psychic things, because I don't know how to test it. But I think I'll just bother Bob with that outside of this call, because I don't need to.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
And that's just because I'm not an experienced Rails developer, and Bob is a maintainer. So on the Rails repo, so on the GitLab Rails repo. Okay, so let's do use feature flags. Yeah, and one thing I wanted to say that also sort of that's related to this, and it came up a little bit yesterday, but I want to restate this, is that leaving the place better than we found it is good, but we need to be very careful about rabbit holes. And if we want to make something
on a rabbit hole right now, like there's plenty, and Vladimir knows them. He sees something, and then like, yeah. So I'm pushing away, and I'm going to link issues in code and stuff, but that's about it.
Yeah, because if we never try to leave the place better than we found it, then that is not a good. Like globally, that is a bad attitude, because then your code just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. But if we are too eager to take on risk to improve things, then we derail this epic, or we create new problems, and that's also bad.
But the risk is like the project taking a bit longer. The risk is not stuff going down or stuff breaking.
Yeah, as long as it's that, and as long as the bit longer is manageable, then I am all for it. I'm every time I see something where I thought this doesn't make sense, and either nobody noticed or nobody felt they had the time to do something about it, it makes me sad, and then I tend to be somebody who tries to do something about it anyway. So I don't think that is a bad habit, which is maybe kind of weird, because now I'm just saying I don't think it's a bad habit because I do it. It might still be a bad habit, but I think it's a good habit, but we just need to be careful about rabbit holes. And you just said you agree with that, so we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll check with you sometimes if I think something might become a rabbit hole, but like...
I think this is a very healthy attitude, and not just because I am quote unquote leading this project, but because talking to somebody else, because of the rubber duck effect, talking to somebody else can help you realize, like, maybe this is not such a good idea after all.
Yeah.
So I'll do the same with you. I'm happy that we're both working on this thing now.
Cool. I'm going to take some time, maybe tomorrow, to fill up the backlog a little bit, because I'm off next week. I don't know what the time frame we have for this. Like, needs to be finished yesterday, I guess. Needs to be finished yesterday.
Oh, because it's urgent.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's not super clear to me either. we no, I don't know, but I don't expect this to be very big. And if you can do some digging in Sentry and find things where you think like, oh wow, this is getting very big, it's better to know earlier than later.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take some time because the two issues that are basically the same with the configuration update. Well, I hope that they would be like the two merge requests that are open for that now. I hope that they are merged this week.
There were two issues about configuration update that looked very similar, and I was doubting whether I should even create two issues or one.
Well, if you merge them into one, then probably it would be merged already, like the first one, because but that's no problem. Like because I could reuse the work from the first issue, so it should go fast.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. And yeah, again, well, thanks for both of you for taking an interest and doing work on this. Is there anything else we want to discuss before we? I think we can end the meeting, but is there anything else we want to discuss before we do? That's a no. Okay.
I'll stop the recording.
Thanks.